How does a character's backstory impact narrative development across various media formats? When we think about great characters in television, video games and film, we rarely think only about what they do, we think about why they do it. More often than not, that why comes from backstory. A character's past experiences, relationships and trauma often shape their decisions, their morality, and ultimately, the direction of the narrative itself. This video essay explores how a character's backstory impacts narrative development across different media formats, predominantly television, video games, and a little bit of films. By examining TV shows that I've watched such as Lost, Sons of Anarchy, The Walking Dead, and finally Power, alongside the narrative-driven games like Telltale's The Walking Dead game, The Last of Us Parts 1 and 2, Detroit Become Human, GTA 5, and finally A Way Out, as well as projects starring Jon Bernthal. This essay will argue that while backstory can greatly enhance narrative depth and engagement, an over-reliance on it can also limit progression and agency. Part 1. Television. Backstory as a narrative engine. In television, characters' backstory is often a key driver of long-form narrative development due to extended runtime and episodic structure, where characters' backstories are not supplemental but central to the storytelling. Each major character is shaped by their life before the island, with flashbacks revealing trauma, regret, and unresolved conflict. John Locke's tragic relationship with his father and Jack Shephard's need for control directly influences their leadership struggles on the island. These backstories actively shape present conflicts, reinforcing the show's themes of destiny, redemption, and identity. Similarly, Sons of Anarchy relies heavily on inherited backstory to develop its narrative. Jax Teller's internal conflict is rooted in the legacy of his father and the founding principles of the Sons of Anarchy Motorcycle Club. This past creates tension between Jax and Clay and drives the series' moral decline. Rather than progressing towards resolution, the narrative repeatedly circles back to the unresolved history, showing how the past can trap characters in a cycle of violence. In The Walking Dead, backstory helps ground extreme situations in realism. Rick Grimes' identity as a former sheriff defines his leadership style and moral code, while characters like Negan are later humanized through revelations about their pre-apocalyptic life. These backstories complicate audience perception, allowing the narrative to explore moral ambiguity rather than simple hero versus villain storytelling. In Power, backstory is fundamental to the narrative structure, as James St. Patrick, also known as Ghost's, upbringing and criminal past shapes his double life as both a drug kingpin and an aspiring legitimate businessman. His desire to escape his past creates constant tension and drives much of the show's conflict. However, Power also highlights a limitation of backstory, as characters frequently repeat destructive behavior justified by past trauma, sometimes stalling the meaningful growth. Part 2. Video games. Backstory and player agency. In video games, characters' backstory often has an even greater impact on narrative development due to player interaction. Unlike film or television, games allow audiences to actively participate in the character's journey, making backstory a powerful tool for emotional engagement. Telltale's The Walking Dead places Lee Everett's criminal past at the center of the narrative. His backstory immediately frames player choices around redemption, morality, and responsibility, particularly in his relationship with Clementine. The player is not just observing Lee's growth, but actively shaping it, demonstrating how backstory can enhance narrative immersion. The Last of Us similarly relies on Joel's backstory, particularly the loss of his daughter, to drive its narrative. Joel's trauma explains his emotional detachment and later overprotectiveness of Ellie. This backstory culminates in the game's controversial ending, where Joel's past ultimately overrides player choices, raising questions about whether strong backstory can sometimes limit interactivity. In Detroit Become Human, backstory and memories play a direct role in narrative development. Characters such as Kara and Marcus uncover their identities through fragments of past experience, shaping the player's understanding of their struggle for freedom. While this adds emotional depth, it can also restrict player agency, as choices often align with predetermined moral paths. GTA 5 uses shared backstory differently, blending narrative tension with satire. The criminal history between Michael, Trevor, and Franklin creates conflict, humour, and momentum. Their past relationships directly influence mission structure and character dynamics, showing how backstory can fuel both narrative progression and gameplay variety. A Way Out offers a unique use of backstory through cooperative gameplay. The contrasting past of Leo and Vincent, one, an impulsive criminal, the other, a former banker turned informant, creates immediate tension between players. As their histories are revealed, through dialogue and flashbacks, the narrative evolves from a prison escape into a story about trust and betrayal. Because two players experience the story simultaneously, backstory becomes an active mechanic that influences cooperation, emotional investment, and the impact of the game's climax. Part 3. Film. Implied backstory and performance. In film, backstory is often more restrained due to time limitations, relying on implication rather than exposition. This is evident in many of Jon Bernthal's performances, where character depth is conveyed through physicality, dialogue, and emotional restraint. In films such as Sekiro and Wind River, Bernthal's characters are shaped by implied past experiences that inform their moral positioning and reactions, without extensive exposition. His portrayal of Frank Castle in The Punisher, though a television series, reflects cinematic storytelling, where grief and trauma drive narrative action. These performances demonstrate how minimal backstory can still strongly influence narrative development when communicated through performances rather than dialogue. When underdeveloped or overly vague, it can reduce emotional connection, turning trauma into shorthand rather than a meaningful narrative force. Part 4. Against. When backstory holds the story back. Despite its strengths, over-reliance on backstory can weaken narrative development across all media formats. In television, repeated flashbacks disrupt pacing, as is seen in the later seasons of Lost and The Walking Dead, where past revelations sometimes replace forward momentum. In video games, strong backstory can limit player choices, as demonstrated by The Last of Us and Detroit Become Human, where narrative control occasionally overrides interactivity. In film, excessive exposition can feel forced, while insufficient exploration can feel hollow. In these cases, backstory becomes a narrative crutch rather than a tool for progression. Part 5. Conclusion. In conclusion, a character's backstory plays a significant role in shaping narrative development across television, video games, and film, as shown in Lost, Sons of Anarchy, The Walking Dead, Power, and narrative-driven games such as Telltale's The Walking Dead, The Last of Us, Detroit Become Human, GTA V, and The Way Out. Backstory can deepen emotional engagement, justify characters' decisions, and reinforce thematic complexity. However, its effectiveness depends on balance. When used purposefully, backstory strengthens narrative development. When overused, it risks stalling progression and limiting agency. Ultimately, the most effective stories allow the past to inform the present without overshadowing it.